Welcome to Comics Magic. My name is Paul Rashid, writer and creator of Bootstrapped, How to Write and Make Your First Comic Book. And with me is an amazing editor, Andrea. Why don't you pronounce your last name? Molinari?
It's Molinari. Yeah.
Molinari.
Yes.
And that's probably, what, Italian?
Yes.
All right. And I had the pleasure of meeting you years ago at a MegaCon because you were the editorial director of Scout Comics for 5 years, and you've also written the comic book Shepherd. So with that, welcome, and just maybe add a little bit. Let's just start with our origin stories. The Comics Magic audience already knows about how I got into comic books, but how did you get into it? Both as a reader, collector, and then in the profession.
Well, it was never the plan. Okay, so I didn't aspire to do that. I read comic books as a kid, loved them. This is back when the spinner racks, where you go into the grocery store, but mostly the pharmacy. Like I remember my dad taking me to the pharmacy and giving me 50 cents or something like that. And back then you could get a couple comics. And so you're having to really, as a little kid, you got this little bit of money. And you're trying to decide which comics you're gonna buy. And I used to love Brave and Bold because I was a big Batman fan for DC.
Yeah.
And Brave and Bold was great because you would get that team up. And then usually there was a backstory. So you'd have like like it might be Green Arrow and Batman with the Atom, as a little backstory. So you get a lot of cool story, and you get exposed to superheroes in one comic. And then I loved Daredevil as a kid. Those are probably my two favorites on either side of the aisle, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I read whatever I could get my hands on, of course. I have some really fond memories of riding the school bus into school and buddies bringing stacks of dog-eared comics, and it'd be you'd read like part 2 of a 3-part story. You'd never finish the story. You'd never.
And I did the same thing. We would swap them, right? And
yeah.
I read this one. Give me this one. We'll trade. Just like
Oh, yeah.
trading cards, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like we were all loved the stories. We loved the characters, but it's like we might have bought them off the rack, or we might have got them at a garage sale, or just any different number of places, and you're just passing them around, reading whatever. It could have been Nick Fury, it could have been Fantastic Four, it could have been anything that you're getting.
I'm hearing, just my guess is this was probably late Silver Age, is kind of when you were coming into your own.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the early 70s is that I was reading this, early 70s and late 70s. I remember like Luke Cage and loving Luke Cage as a kid, and Iron Fist, and those guys starting to become a factor in the 70s. And of course the Batman of the 1970s was kind of a different Batman. Where he's a vigilante who operates openly, at that point. Then, of course, I always jokingly say, and not really jokingly, but of course, as you're going to high school in the 80s, I went to high school in the early 80s. If you didn't ever want to have a girlfriend,
yes,
the very best way to achieve that was to read comics.
There you go. It's the same thing with me. I came in. I started really, I read them, yes, early in elementary school, but actually when I was about 10 or 12 years old, that's when I got into collecting and reading and, going to the local comic store on comic book. At that time it was Friday, and besides, Christopher Reeve's Superman and Michael Keaton's Batman, comics were still, we'll just say, not talked about. It wasn't cool. And then now, which is different than today, which is great because you can walk around with a Flash T-shirt or an Iron Man T-shirt, and
Right.
people, oh, I love it, and because of all the movies, which is great, right. But it was different for us. So,
For sure.
and
No
if I
doubt.
remember when I spoke with you though, when you were in college or university, you did study. What was your major?
Well, I had, as an undergraduate, I studied journalism and theology. I loved literature. I took a ton of, like, my electives were all, English lit, modern drama. It was all literature based because I always wanted to write. But I also was thinking in terms of a university teaching career.
Yeah.
Because I ended up getting a doctorate. My specialty is early Christian literature. I did the New Testament. I studied biblical literature. But my specialty was folklore, early Christian folklore,
Wow.
coming from the 2nd to the 4th century. So in that category, there's a few things that fall into that category. Legends about the apostles, which can be very fantastical. I urge anybody who likes comics, this could be a rich field for study of interest, the kind of things like, for example, you can Google this, by the way, and read it right online. It's called the Apocryphal Acts of Peter. In that document that dates from the late 2nd century into the 3rd, Peter battles Simon Magus, the evil magician, who's his arch enemy. It starts in the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament, but he battles him, and this guy can fly. This is taking place, by the way, in the city of Rome.
Wow.
He's flying, and Peter literally prays him out of the sky. I'm not making this up. So it's like he's using a prayer blast to take this guy who's flying across the sky in Rome and take him out and cause him to fall. They have like a raising of the dead contest. I'm not making this up.
But
This
again,
is easily
if you go back
discovered
to
by.
the Old Testament, I'm a fan of. I have read the Bible, the Old and New Testament, years ago. I have watched Ancient Aliens, but we know that there are things that are described that are hard to visualize, but are well described as smoke and flames and flying crafts and people ascending into.
Yeah.
I think Mother Mary and Jesus ascended in a form. So, anyways, I'll let you keep going. But
No, it's all those kinds of
out there.
legends and stories. One of the I'll just tell you the title of one of the things I used to study. It was called Andrew and Matthias. These are the apostles, Andrew and Matthias, in the city of the cannibals. And I'm just going to leave that right there.
There you go.
Not making that up. Not making that up. That one's a straight up. That's an interesting. That's actually a really cool document.
Yeah,
I used to enjoy teaching that to my grad students.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
What my point was is that fantastical literature. I was studying also literature of the martyrs, which can be very wild. Some of it can be really wild, and so it wasn't really a hard jump to get into comics because it's that same kind of like heroic literature. It's literature that is folklore oriented. So it was really an easy transition.
Yeah. And I just loved you gave at a local convention in Southeast Florida a talk, and I just valued it. It was so cool. And again, maybe for another time, but where you went through really some of the earliest pictographs or comic books or visual storytelling, which we know is Egyptian hieroglyphs. So I just thought that was so cool, and then that's when I just I really wow. I just said I want to talk to you again and more. And so just to finish up though, so you ended up getting your undergrad was journalism and theology.
Journalism and theology. I did a master's in biblical studies at Providence College, and then went into early Christian literature in Marquette University in Milwaukee. Wow. So that was about 11 years worth of nonstop, 5 languages. It was a lot.
Woo.
So I enjoyed it though. Ended up teaching for 12 and a half years at the university. Finally got to the point where, you're bouncing around because the job situations are not good. If you can get them, you're usually an adjunct professor running a satellite program, and the satellite program is always hanging by a thread. It needs to have enough students. It's got to have the right funding, and these things can collapse out. And usually about every 5 or so years, you're having to look for another job. And my wife finally got to the point. She's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. We came to Florida. She loves Florida. I actually had 2 jobs that were offered to me in Texas, but she's like, I don't want to live in Texas. And I was like, well, you want me to what? Go to Texas and live there and then commute on the weekends, or what would that be? And I was like, we didn't get married to be living separate lives, so I guess I'm going to stay here in Florida and find something else to do, you know. Yeah. So that was kind of how that went, and I loved the teaching, but I just didn't love the foolishness that went with it. You know, it was just like I have a ton of, before I published with the Shepherd, just to put this in perspective, I have about 545 published pages in this series. I have another 106 that's just waiting, just got to get a publisher to send it out there. It's done. And I have another script for another 100-page novel that is, we just need to start work on. Yeah. But with the academia, it's never enough. You know, I had 4 books published, you know, so, articles. I still get notices, people reading the articles, but it just, the job situation is terrible.
Yeah, I mean, like you have an advanced, you know, graduate education. I'm a physician, psychiatrist, so I have, you know, extensive. You know, I joke when I was 30, I was a lifelong student. You know what I mean? Because and it can be comfortable as a student or as a professor. At the same time, there is politics in academia. But so, what was your first experience with creating or editing a comic book?
Okay, so it really, I would say before I actually did a comic book, I was doing these scholarly books, okay? And I finally, you know, you're spending 2.5, 3 years of your life, just, you're not going on vacation. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, and you're producing this scholarly piece of literature that's world class, that 50 people on the planet give a shit about, you know? Seriously, I mean, that's, you know, my books are in Harvard Library, you know, but no one cares. Like maybe 5 people have read them at Harvard, you know. So I finally got to the point where I was like, I need to do something that has any chance of all of getting a return on investment. So I decided to go into, you know, novels. So I wrote my first book was a novel, but I wanted it to be an illustrated novel. So that is the window. That's the gateway drug.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I ended up doing the novel, got it published. You know, I commissioned like 33 original paintings, full page paintings that went inside the book. Wow. And really loved it. Loved working with an artist, loved seeing the vision, the ideas that I have come to life. So that possibility of doing that was introduced at that point. That was like 2006. 2006. Then I had this, I was like 2008, 2009, I had this nightmare about my son. And it was really graphic and really intense. And it took me, I always tell this story, it took me about 2 days to get up enough nerve to talk to my son about it. He was a teenager at the time. And his whole reaction was, "Dad, that's so cool." You know, it was the dream. I dreamed that he had died of a drug overdose, by the way.
Scary.
And I was just like, yeah, that's not really cool at all. It's actually quite the opposite of cool. And but his vision from the beginning was, we need to do something with this story. It needs to become a graphic novel or comic or something like that. And he just pestered me. And I didn't have time because I'm doing scholarly stuff, you know. And then he actually overheard me. This is in 2011. So it's a couple of years had passed, you know. And 2011, he overhears me talk to my wife saying, you know, I turned in my last scholarly article. I actually have a month or two where I can take a deep breath before fall classes. And he's like, "Dad, you know, this is just the opportunity we've been waiting for." And I'm like, who's the we here? You know?
Yeah.
But he pestered me, and I was like, okay, well, look, if it'll get you to leave me alone, we'll do this. So we sat down together. He's like a parrot over my shoulder. And we wrote the script for what was volume 1 of The Shepherd. And I thought it was over. And of course, he's like, "Oh no, we're going to get this. We're going to get art for this." And, you know, so, but that's how it started. It was June of 2011 that we actually wrote the script, and we started art in September of the same year.
Yeah. So let me ask you, how did you become editor director of Scout Comics?
Well, it goes back to my days with Caliber Comics because Caliber is the one that published The Shepherd.
Okay, I didn't. Okay, so you ultimately got the Shepherd published through Caliber, which I remember from the '90s
Yes.
as a a hard to find Caliber comics.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Caliber just a lot of it gave Caliber gave the start to a lot of really big names in the comic book industry. Brian Michael Bendis, Ed Brubaker, David Mack, lots of others, Guy Davis. Gary Reed was in charge of that company. He was the publisher, and he was a prolific writer himself. He ended up giving me my start in comics, like he did with a lot of other people. And I remember we were talking. Used to write to him a lot, and we never talked on the phone, but he would always write these long emails to me. And I learned a ton from him through our correspondence. And anyway, I said I had sent my book, The Shepherd, out to 40 publishers, no lie, and only a couple of them even bothered to respond.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not even talking about telling me to jump in a lake.
Yeah.
You know.
Just radio silence, which is more and more common, and yeah, just one thing that you have to realize in the creative field, whether you're an actor and going for auditions, or if you're like me and I was a few years ago, showing you my script and my pages and this, that, the other. Be ready for a rejection, but there's hundreds of stories about it was the 300th time. I'm a big fan of McFarlane's work, and I follow him, and I think it was 300 plus 800 plus rejections before he breaks in. So again, yeah. So you got a few rejections.
Oh yeah, yeah. But when I said that to him, I said, well, I'm just surprised that so few responses at all. And he said, well, you got to understand that for most publishers, they're small, and looking at submissions is one of 100 things that I do. And I said, well, I told him what I did at that time. I taught literature, and pretty intensely, by the way. I mean, I was trained as a literary critic, so I mean, I know a thing or two about literature. So I said, let me look over your submissions package. I'll make recommendations for you, and then you decide what you want to do with them. And he was like, I had said that to him a couple times, and finally one day, I think he did this, by the way, to get me off his back. He sent me a package with 30 submissions. I think that was his way of telling me, But the irony of it is, as a university professor, that is a regular Tuesday on midterms. So I was like, bring it. Is that all? Is that what you got?
Yeah.
That's one class, at one part of the year. Right. So I was like, I had them done, everything evaluated, art, story, lettering, recommendation of what to do with it.
Wow.
2 days back at him.
Whoa, you turned around 30.
Yeah, because that's what any professor can do that. Any professor, because of what you have to do at midterms and finals for every class, every semester. So it wasn't a big deal, but I think he was like, whoa. And we disagreed on different things, which that's fine. You're never going to find two people to agree completely on a piece of literature. But from that point on, he would send me stuff to look at, get my opinion. Even if he had an opinion on it, he would still send it to me. And that's how we got started. And then that evolved from submissions, and I was out there going to conventions too. So if I saw somebody like you that had a book that looked cool, I'd say, hey, why don't you send this in? Here's Gary's email, direct email. Tell him that I sent this to you. I think it's got potential. And so I was starting to help recruit books for the company. And then it wasn't that much, they asked me if I would, edit for them. And so I did. I started editing. And of course, I'd been editing scholarly stuff. So trust me, going to comics was,
fun. It's a little different. It's not as heavy as some.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, it just
can be. That is awesome. So I am just curious, how many books have you probably edited in your career? I mean, we're probably talking thousands.
Well, in terms of IPs, I think in terms of IPs. So, because if you talk about individual comic books, it would be, I have no idea. But I would say IPs, I probably have done somewhere between 250 and 300.
Okay.
And I've done, like novels too, because just like this year, you don't usually get as many novels, but I've done 3 novels just since the year began.
Okay,
And these
so I
are,
got to here. That's good
hundreds of pages.
because so when I kickstarted Red Ram #1, it's like the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns. It's the aging vigilante. I realized no one knows who the Red Ram is, so I got with a great writer and we made Red Ram Origins, which is
Cool.
the origin. So I might have to pick your brain on that one later.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and those are fun too because it's so much bigger project. It's a different kind of thing than editing comics. But like I edited just this week, I did a horror anthology for creators from Edmonton,
Oh my god.
and that's one of the things I will tell you that I has been an unexpected pleasure about editing is meeting people from all over the world. I jokingly say, and this is not an exaggeration, I could drink across Italy and Spain without any trouble. I have a lot of friends in both those countries, but I've edited for people and have friends now in Croatia and France, obviously Italy and Spain, England, Germany, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, trying to think of some, India, Japan. So I mean, you get this experience of meeting people, and what's neat about it is you have this shared love and affection for comics, for the medium, but also for characters. Characters that are special to you, that touched you as a kid or growing up. They came into your life at a time where you needed them. That they spoke to a particular element of your life.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. But you also grew up under some really different circumstances, and it's been a real treat for me.
Yeah.
And I have stuff hung up around my office from different creators that I've edited for. I like one of them I'm so proud of having worked with him. He's from Christchurch, New Zealand,
Yeah.
and just a fabulous guy, really talented. His name is Sam Moore. He did a work called Traveler's Guide to Flogoria, and really charming work. The main character is a painfully introverted man who is teleported into an alternate world where he has no protection and he has no choice but to be an extrovert, even though it's challenging for him. But he finds that he can do it, that he ends up making friends, and that the core of who he is capable of this.
Wow.
And growing. It's about human growth
That
and
is this
building
human growth
friendship.
story. And I can appreciate that because I think I'm a default introvert. And of course, being a psychiatrist, I've studied introversion, extroversion, and there's different ways to think about each of these. But I kind of trained myself over decades to be. I can be an extroverted, but I definitely recharge. I need my downtime. And,
Yeah, well, I think so. Me too.
Yeah.
I think that's very true.
And I'll just share. I think it's awesome that you mentioned traveling too, and I've traveled to numerous countries. And one thing one of my mentors, Dr. Filler, would always tell me was, I mean, probably one of the best just educational experiences you can have is traveling to another country because you're going to see cultures and a way of living that's different than your own culture that you were raised in, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And again, it just adds more enrichment to our lives. So I love that. One thing I'm just going to kind of go here is, you talked about meeting so many people from around the world, and I'll say, thank goodness, because hey, even we happen to be 30 minutes down the road from each other, but we're meeting virtually. And my artist is probably 3,000 miles away, and my editor's 2,000 miles north of me, and it's just great that comics. And I had a little background as an amateur filmmaker. You can still find, if you type in my name in YouTube, you'll see some of my amateur high school stuff where I was recording VCR to VCR.
Okay.
But whether it's a movie, film, TV, comic books, it is a team sport. Let's call it. It's collaborative field, a creative field.
I like that.
Unless you're that one rare person that can do it all, which is great too. But I'm just gonna. I want to get your aspect from an editor because I use an editor. I use artists, I use colorists and letterers, but yet of the books that I'm working on, I kind of use the term producer because I am producing it.
Yes.
And because I wrote the script and it's my story that I own, um, I'm the one going out and basically, I guess if you're in the business world, they call these things, with CRMs, you're logistically, you're keeping the logistics of, okay,
Yeah.
my script is now with the artist. I need to get the layouts back. Then we review it. Then I give feedback and I get the pencils done. And then I come back and I make revisions. And then, it's this process, but using a team. So what would you just say to someone who's starting out or early in their comic creating career, just about, from an editor perspective, about collaboration / project manager of your comic book?
Well, I think the best thing that anybody can do who's beginning is I would recommend that they get an experienced editor on board who will guide them through the entire process. I do that for a number of my first timers. There are things that I have them do on their own because ultimately they can and they should, but I kind of like look over their shoulder and I kind of like prep them for what needs to be done. I think one of the things just the first thing that a good editor can do for you is experienced editor should have a creator Rolodex. And what I mean by that is they should have a whole I have a bunch of portfolios of artists, colorists, letterers that I can show you as we start to zero in at different price points. It's very common, I'm sure any editor that you talk to, where as an editor, you get approached by artists. Usually every week I get approached by an artist. And they are, sending me their portfolio and I'm happy to get it. And I just say, here, give it to me in a PDF. And in that PDF, I want you to, put your price per page or your range at least. Tell me what you can do, what kind of services you're willing to do, what prices you want to do, and then your full contact information. Because I'm not an agent in the sense that I'm not taking a cut. I'm just trying to help people, put you with you. So what I do is I say this creator needs this. They need a colorist. So here are some portfolios of colorists. Take a look at their portfolios. If you like one, reach out to them. The contact information is in the PDF. And I wouldn't give them to you if I didn't feel good about their work.
Yeah.
If I don't think that their work is up to snuff, I won't put them in my portfolio. So that's the first thing that an editor can do for you is help to assemble a team. With every team, I always say that especially with your artist, which is your core of your team, there are three things you've got to get out of an artist.
All right,
One is you have to have the skill. They have to be skilled.
Yes.
Okay, because if you're going to get a publisher, your art is, I've actually had publishers tell me that I know in 20 seconds if I'm going to publish the book. What does that tell you? They're not reading anything in 20 seconds. Maybe the cover, in terms of what's the title.
Right.
But they're not reading your synopsis in 20 seconds. I'm sorry. They're looking at the art and they're making a decision if the art is publishable art. And then from there, they'll look at the other stuff.
Yeah.
So that artist choice is critical, but you have to have somebody who's skilled. You have to have somebody who has the work ethic. And by that, I'm looking for somebody who has a track record of finished projects.
Yeah.
Because you can be super talented, and if you can't finish the job, it doesn't matter. Because the world isn't going to go looking for your journal. This is not the 19th century where they're like, oh, look at so-and-so's journal of all unpublished ideas, and we'll publish them. Nobody cares about that at all. It's all about what have you done. So you're a finisher. Ultimately, so you talented, finisher, and affordable.
Yeah.
And affordable is different for each person, of course.
Yeah, it depends on what is a project. I think those are some great points. I think that, and that's what I do. So I sourced my team through a variety of different means, but I did use I did have an editor. I've worked with a couple editors. At that point, though, I kind of already had assembled my team, and I had used some social media I found actually helpful for me. I tell you what I learned, a couple threads to pull on here. I learned the importance of sequential artwork. And another way to say that is visual. So we're talking about visual storytelling, and in film, when you edit things, there's certain ways you need to edit when people are talking, so it doesn't make disorient your reader or audience, right?
Right.
And I had one artist, and unfortunately, yeah, the characters were the same in each panel, but it looked like a different room every panel. So it just talk about some of the invisible, and we can go any way you want, but there are some tips and tricks of it. The invisible story telling art, which include Z-line, the way we, at least in the Western culture, read left to right through a page. Sequential, the difference of just doing a splash page and versus sequential artwork, and then maybe like sometimes like the mini cliffhanger for the way you look at an even and odd page and how to keep the reader's interest, and then maybe at the end of your floppy, if you're doing floppies, keeping a little cliffhanger. Just kind of take with whatever resonates with you.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot there. I guess the first thing I would talk about is you were talking about a filmmaker, and I actually deal with a number of my creators are screenwriters, and so what I'm trying to do is help them understand the differences between that and what we're doing with comics. And the way I describe it is when you're making a film, you have this video camera that's just taking this full sequence of events from, it's a slice of literally of events that are happening at this moment. And what I said is you still have a camera with comics, but now it's a Polaroid.
Yes.
So what that means is you have to say, what are the essential beats, the essential moments that need to be captured as you tell this story? And it could be something as simple as the expression on a person's face when they see something. So like you were talking about the page turn. Now, keep in mind, it's different. The page turn has different significance in different kinds of stories. Like a horror story, for example, you might see at the final panel of a page before a page turn, you might see the person's expression. We don't see yet what they see. When you turn the page, you might get the splash page of this horrible murder scene where the monster has killed these various people and stuff like that. So, obviously you're serving the story. That's what this is all about, is trying to tell the story in the most impactful way that you can. And those are some of the tools in your tool chest that you have, But I do think that understanding of the Polaroid camera, understanding that you have...
I like that. I like the Polaroid, and then because... the beat is what needs to be captured in that photograph, and you can't. And one thing I learned, because I kind of had that film background and script background, is I was putting a little too much in each panel, too much action, so it can only really capture one thing with the text to supplement that. And then there is this cool concept, which again you think more and more it's in the mind of the reader, is what happens in between panels too. Sure. Which fills in the gaps.
Right. It's kind of like you're like a trapeze artist that you're trying to get them really from one moment, letting go, and then catching them in the next moment. But the idea is implying what's happened in between those panels, and even being okay with using cuts, like having that scene cut and go back to a different scene. That can be a great way to get you out of a particular scene where you don't want to, you have a limited amount of space. Like one of the things, by the way, you might appreciate this. I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh when I think of it. But the number of panels on a page is also really important.
Oh yeah, no, that's good.
Because like, I like to have like 5 as a medium.
Yeah.
Now you can have less and you can have more. Obviously a splash page is 1 panel. You can do your 2 panel pages, your 3s, 4s, 5s, etc. And you can do more than that. But one of the fun things, this is what I'm laughing at, is that you tell that to a filmmaker and their solution is just add more panels. What you can't do, because here's what happens: as you add more panels to the page, they get smaller. So you actually have less dialogue room.
Yeah.
And so where a lot of panels can be helpful for is if you don't want to have a lot of words, but you want to move people through very quickly through a sequence, where something is happening, bam, 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 like a machine gun. It might be a situation where somebody is like moving through an environment very quickly, like they're running, or, and maybe you're just seeing glimpses of them, like that Polaroid, like this person is running through this dark alleyway. And we're getting shot.
Great. We're talking about the pacing of the story, which I'll even say is another level that I get it, but I haven't executed it in my storytelling, I think, lately. But think of a Daredevil going from a Hell's Kitchen apartment, a cityscape, and you could do that. So you're saying you could use more panels quickly with a lot of action to take you through that before it slows down to a splash page or a confrontation or a dialogue scene.
Absolutely. And it can be really cool because you can see you're not doing a lot of noise. You might have some special effects where they hit something or jump off something else. But it can be a really cool way to kind of demonstrate them doing their thing, just to help the reader understand the skill set that they might have. If it's a superhero or but it's different for every character. It might be a situation where it's not a superhero scene. It could be something that, let's say, a character is receiving terrible news. Okay? Like maybe, God forbid, somebody that they love has died, and they're on the phone, and they're starting to hear what happened. The reader probably already knows, has maybe been shown what happened, and we watch them go, hey, yes, you're picking up the phone to answer the phone. You've got a smile on your face because maybe you're cooking dinner or something like that, and then boom, 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 you start to watch the aspect go, and then the phone drops from their hand, in the last of that sequence. Yeah. So in that case, instead of moving through an environment, you're showing a moment of trauma or a moment of realization played out like that. That can be very powerful too, because
very powerful.
It's all, again, it's serving the story.
Yeah.
What is it that you really want to drive home as a storyteller?
Yeah.
But the key thing is you don't want to do that too much, because having too many panels on a page limits your ability for dialogue.
Yeah.
Although again, that said, you could use multiple pages for dialogue back and forth, but it would need to be a very staccato and very brief dialogue between, like you're using almost like one-word responses or two-word or small back and forth like that.
Yeah, no, I just, when I looked into panels per page and I was trying to figure out for the Red Ram, I settled after a few issues because issue 1 it was a little more looser, and then I tightened up as I learned more each, and that's what I love about Bootstrapped is I'm taking basically, and I read over about 15 books as I was on this journey right before I started writing, just before COVID, serendipitously, but and kind of implement all these different things, and I was trying to look at all these different examples in these beautiful boxes, and I think I've settled. I like 6 panels a page because I want to tell so much, but my artist likes to bring those 6 to about 5 or 4. But it was just, let me just end with this one on the panels per page, because when I go back, and again, I'm very influenced by Frank Miller's work.
Yeah.
And I was going back to the original Dark Knight Returns, and of course, on a lot of his panels, which of course he did the art and drew, and was a writer, a lot of them had 9 panels.
Yes. Yeah.
3 by 3. I could have sworn there might have even been 12 on some pages.
He did. Yeah.
And the TV stories with these anchors, and there were some were heavy text, some were not. But it's just interesting. Again, I think it goes back to you, and I'm going to come back to this one before we end. But serving the story, I'll come back to that, but that's
Okay.
really interesting. Let me ask you a question. You touched on something that I haven't quite figured out, and I realize I haven't talked to anyone about this one, not even my own editor. But since I am in the superhero genre. I do a lot. I do parody. I do superhero, but fight scenes. Or we could do the because you were mentioning like the reveal of maybe like or like in a horror comic or a crime comic. How would a writer think about a fight scene? Because now, and the artist might have a different mind that I'm not aware of, but like, character is doing X, Y, and Z behavior, or they're on the trail of some case, and then there's a fight scene between him and the villain. But to me, it doesn't really. I mean, they're going to be fighting. To me, it's not. Well, this panel has to be a punch, and then this one's a kick. How do you approach that, either as a writer and/or editor, in a fight scene, just generically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be a moment where you can step on your artist, and I like to say, here's some things that I would like to see done in that, but generally I want you to go ahead and have fun with this.
Yeah.
I want to take the restrictions off. What I might do is I'm really big on reference photos, and I build them into my script and I supply them usually with a folder per issue.
Yep.
And I label them so that he or she could find them quickly.
Yeah.
And I say, these are some really cool poses or things like that I think might be fun. You don't have to use them, but just kind of like get into the same headspace as me, and then just have a good time with this. One thing I've learned is not every artist does fight scenes well. So if you're going to have a superhero story, it is best to hire an artist who has experience doing that kind of thing. Same thing if you care about, like, if I tend to gravitate towards historical stories, writing historical. I do with the Shepherd, a lot of it is historical horror. Okay? Because the Shepherd operates in the afterlife, so he's catching these people that are reliving moments of their historical life.
Wow.
So I tend to look for people that are detail-oriented artists that it matters to them to get details right. Someone can be very loosey-goosey with that, and that's not what I'm looking for. So that's, again, knowing what you are doing in terms of the story and trying to hire an artist that does that.
Yeah. That's interesting. Thanks for going a little there. Let me ask you. We'll finish up on the invisible story telling through the visual medium of comics books. We talked about just some of those things that might, if it's done poorly, take a reader out of it. And so maybe we haven't talked about dialogue, things like that. Anything, and that's the way that, sometimes it's one of those things you just kind of know it. Of course, you have to be aware of it to be aware of it, to know it. But I will know. For me, when I read a comic book and I just read the comic book, and I'm not taking out of the reading experience, I'm in the magic of that comic book or that movie. So the way I know it is, if I'm stuck and I read a panel and I have to go back and read it again and try to figure out, am I going over or down? And that's when I know I'm the reader taken out of it. How do you as an editor think about some of those elements of the invisible art of lettering, dialogue, text boxes, thought bubbles, any of that?
Well, there's a number of things you can talk about there. You really are. I tend to like to introduce captions that are time location captions.
Yep. Me too.
It doesn't mean you have to. It's 3:19 a.m. New York City. Hell's Kitchen, New York City. It doesn't have to be that specific, but you're helping the reader understand yes, there's a scene change. It's clear that you can see it visually, but where are we? Boom. That helps kind of helps make the transition less jarring. So that's something that I like to do. You don't want to overuse them, but some of that, and it can be a little pedantic, but sometimes I think that it helps to smooth the transitions and it can be helpful. Another thing that I think, I have a principle that I'll just toss out there. You can't love what you don't know. Think about that for a second. You can't love what you don't know.
Yeah.
And as a writer, we want our characters to be loved, or we want our characters to be appreciated, understood. We want people to react to them. You know, even if it's, I hate that guy, you know, but it's a passionate reaction to that character, you know. And the way that you achieve knowledge, you know, is you have to kind of like introduce that character to the reader, you know. So this is a little thing. It's a little trick that you can do, is to use their name in dialogue more than what you would normally do in real life.
Yes.
You know, so like when I'm talking to you, it's Paul, you know, so I remind you at critical moments, I'm reminding the reader who that person's, what their name is. It's, the name is the most important thing for them to begin to know a character. And as they begin to know a character, they become invested in that character. Mm-hmm. What the character feeling, the feelings of the character, the thoughts of the character, the aspirations. What does that character want? You know, and so that's an important thing. It's a little thing, but I think it's important. I think it matters.
Too. There's an art to do it, and you and again, as a reader, as you're reading comics or books or novels, you'll start picking up on, and of course, with a little more critical editorial hat on, I'll be, I like the way they said that name or the nickname, but so it was nice and it didn't feel forced, and then sometimes it just kind of feels forced, like, you know, just blurting out the name, but again, realizing it's done for a reason.
Right. Especially if you have a bigger cast, keeping those characters straight and starting to associate certain things with those characters, certain, you know, points of view, that type of thing, I think is important. Those are some of the, you know, just a couple of things. I mean, with regard to the lettering too, I mean, they always talk about good lettering guides the eye through the page. You don't notice it if it's been done well. Sometimes artists design pages in ways that fight letterers. Okay? A perfect example of this is where you have, imagine a panel at the top of the page, okay? And then as you're looking at the page, so you have your main panel up here.
Yeah, kind of a top third master shot.
And then they have a panel here and a panel here, and then one long panel here.
Yeah, don't like that because it's a little confusing. Am I going down then over and then down again? You're against the Z line.
Exactly. It's not ideal, but it's what you've been given sometimes, what the artist is given. Yes. You know, and remember, as an editor, you're brought in at all different times. Sometimes you don't have any option to change anything. Right. So in those cases, sometimes and this, you'll find this, Marvel and DC have done this, where they introduce a little arrow that
the red arrow.
You know, it's kind of pedantic, but you know what? It's better than having the reader be confused. So sometimes being an editor, and like I said, it's all based on when you're brought into the program.
Like you said, you might be like, your deadline's today, close of business 5 p.m. Fix it now.
Yeah.
You don't have time to go back to the artist.
You're trying to make it as readable and have it flow as best you can. You also, this is a little thing, by the way, that I'm not sure if it belongs here, but one of the fun things is where writers will say something in dialogue that's actually shown in the art.
Okay.
And this is kind of a beginner thing.
Right.
But it's, as an editor, you want to point that out to them, is ideally you really don't need that. You know, cutting out some of the extra stuff, and you'll run into this with screenwriters. Screenwriters can be very loquacious when it comes to like their dialogue. Like, I'll give you an example. This is an extreme example. Okay. My wife made me watch this series one time together with her. It's the Gilmore Girls. Have you ever seen that?
Heard of it.
Okay, well, check it out sometime. I have never seen a television show. It's actually pretty good, but I've never seen a television show that has more dialogue. Like the actresses who had to do that, I would have wanted to strangle the writers a few times just because you have to memorize all that dialogue, much less present it in a way that feels natural and like, like conversational.
Yeah.
But, you'll get this a lot as an editor when you're working with a screenwriter is they just give you all this information and it's like you have to say, well, we got to boil this down. Yeah. I want you to, and usually there's trauma involved here. Okay.
Yeah.
Like
I get it.
You need a counselor, so you have to say, I want you to cut this in half, knowing that the next time I'm going to ask them to cut it again.
Yeah.
But even cutting it in half is traumatic for them because it's like they're going to lose all that dialogue, and I want you to boil it down.
Are used to. Sometimes screenwriters feel like they're the director and the writer, but the director has to come in and interpret it, and then the actors have to interpret their characters. No. But so you don't have to have that expose, which again makes me think of kind of like a 1960s or 70s kind of Daredevil or Spider-Man, where Stan Lee says Spidey swings through the cities as he's swinging through the city. Well, you didn't have to have that. You figured it out, but that's what you're talking about, right?
Right, and keep in mind, like I would say some of those early books. First of all, I know this is heresy, but I don't think Stan Lee was a particularly great writer. I don't think he'd get published today, to be honest with you. He's an idea man. Yes. He's a great idea man.
Yes.
But I don't think as a writer. But also keep in mind that they're also writing to 8 to 12-year-old boys. Yeah. That's who they're writing to. Who, by the way, those guys are reading those comics because they're looking for Daredevil to punch somebody.
Yes.
That's why they're reading it. Is who's going to get punched this month. So it's a little bit of that too.
Let me ask you.
I'll probably get a bunch of hate mail about the Stan Lee thing, but
hey,
all I say is read his original origin of Spider-Man, and tell me that is a great writer, and I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
Or any of the origin stories.
Now we're talking about a Marvel, and it makes me think of the Marvel method.
Oh God!
I've used tight scripts. Because I have a relationship with my artist, and it's, once you send a few of those pictures and they know what you're thinking about, and you get in each other's mind, and you get shortcut languages, and I have done some looser scripts with my artist, who's amazing, Miguel Galindo, who's done the artwork for Bootstrapped and some other books. Have you ever worked or edited people's work that kind of did a Marvel method?
I hate it. Because I'm a big believer that the story should be crafted before you ever engage an artist. It should be, I tell my people, I want it to be about 95% of where it needs to be before we talk to an artist. Because if you have to make changes, it's expensive. It wastes the artist's time. They feel like they're dealing with an amateur, and you really don't want to do that, because they make money by turning projects done, getting them done. So they don't want to be hindered. They want to be able to read the script, believe that's what we're going to be doing, and move through the process. The problem with the Marvel method, in my opinion, is it leads to problems in the storytelling like this. But again, it comes out of a period where the stories are simple. Yeah. It's like enter the Rhino. Like the Rhino is not, he's not a Socratic philosopher or anything, It's like he's going to run into things, So it's like he's big and powerful, he's going to run into things. And Spidey is eventually going to defeat him by getting him to run into something that it won't give, and he'll knock himself out.
I appreciate that, and I definitely agree that if you want for a professional presentation with a full script that has a full arc and the details that need to get through has to be well thought out. But
what about things like elements of storytelling too, like foreshadowing? How are you going to do a lot of foreshadowing if it's more like you're just getting this sequence of things that are happening? I just think you end up with a less complex story, a less nuanced, and I think ultimately a less satisfying read. but it comes out of an attitude that makes the art the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not an artist. I want to say that, so that this is going to sound biased, but good art in a comic book with a mediocre story is like fireworks. Ooh, ah, what's next?
Yeah.
It doesn't stay with you. But I guarantee you, the stories like The Dark Knight Returns, like The Light Brigade, if you've ever read that, Peter Tomasi wrote that. I think it's one of the best I've ever read.
Wow.
Storytelling that sticks with you. If you care as a writer about writing stories that will stick with people, that will be their all-time favorite graphic novel, it doesn't come through the Marvel method.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And I would say there were when I was heavy into reading, and I focus much more on my attention these days on creating. But when I was a big reader, I would say this was a good comic, and then I have the masterpieces, and The Dark Knight Returns,
Yeah.
the Watchmen, etc., etc., and those things were scripted very specifically with the entire story in mind, as you said. So very good points. Let me ask you a pivot here a little bit, because we have been talking a lot. So I have a few more questions I'd love to just explore before we do wrap up. Is teaching literature. So part of what I'm doing with Bootstrapped is not only am I hoping that I want someone to not only who's thought about making their own comic book, I want to help them make it.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned in 4 years of university, 4 years of medical school, and 4 years of residency in psychiatry, I learned how to learn. And I had to learn a lot of information quickly. And, the more senses you engage, the quicker you're going to learn. So you could be sitting passively in a lecture hall. You're going to get a little bit. You could be actively taking notes. You're going to retain a little bit more. You can actually be, and I love today because there's a lot of videos. I learn through videos as well. Yeah. And then, of course, doing and experiencing, etc. So the more senses you engage, the faster you're going to retain it. So in medical school, you see one procedure done, like performing stitches or an operation. You do one under medical supervision with a physician and a resident, and then if you're a med student, and then of course you teach one to another student, and that's how you learn. So I'm wondering, what, as a teacher teaching literature, what would be something that would be applicable for someone wanting to write a comic book? What would be a top lesson or thought, just because it's such a unique experience you have teaching that?
Well, I do believe, and I did this as a professor in grad school. Okay, so like for example, I had classes where we taught about the Gospels in the early church, and what I wanted to understand at the time, and it may have changed since then. At the time, we had not just the 4 Gospels that people know from the Bible, but there was actually 39 that we have, and all different states of condition. So some of them we have quotes from that are attributed to a gospel that we don't have. So we only have a couple of quotes in that case of that previously existing piece of manuscript. We have fragments, papyrus fragments of things, and in some cases we actually have complete manuscripts, or mostly complete manuscripts, like a Gospel of Thomas. And what I would do is teach my students how Gospels were assembled, that the writer had like theological and sociological ideas that they wanted to get across.
Wow.
And they picked and chose different elements, pre-existing elements, and assembled them together for their community that they were writing to.
Wow. And
so I said, okay, to my students, I want you to write a gospel. You can include, here's 39 sources. I lay them out in front of you. They actually have books that exist where these are all there. So I want you to look at this material and put together a gospel of your own using anything you want. Anything from any of these gospels, any of the 39. And then we're going to come back and we're going to look at it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze your gospel in front of the entire class, and I'm going to get at what are some of your conscious things and what are some of your unconscious agenda
Wow.
as you do that. And I did that for them. And it was really fun because I'm doing this by the seat of my pants, but you need to understand I spent years analyzing this kind of literature. So it was, was second nature at that stage. But doing for the comic book, what I would say is, I want you to write me a 12-page comic book. And I would give them, this is a script. This is what it looks like. And I want you to write a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. And ideally, I'd like you to have an idea that could become bigger. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, I say, I want you to think about the original trilogy of Star Wars. Okay, which really, by the way, started out as an original movie.
Yep.
It wasn't a trilogy. Okay? So it starts out as a movie, and, they had no way of knowing that it was going to blow up. No way of knowing. There's no way you could know. You could hope, but you certainly don't know that. And I said, I want you to think about that movie. It has a perfectly wonderful ending. Remember, they're getting their awards, their medals, and everybody's smiling, and, they've destroyed the Death Star. But nobody who thinks about it thinks that war is over, because Darth Vader's alive, the Emperor's alive, the fleet, the Imperial fleet is fine, but they've reached a milestone. It's a satisfying story. So that's what I want in that 12-page. I want you to give me a satisfying story that is open-ended enough where it could become something more.
I love it.
And that's a great drill, and see, here's why I think this is important for a beginning comic book creator. I think it's vital, and I think you and I actually talked about this. Having the experience of success. It's really important, and you can finish a 12-page comic book. You can do it. I mean, you can afford it, you can hire somebody to write that script. It's not, it's not War and Peace. It's not Leo Tolstoy.
Yeah. So, I love this, and I'm going to jump back to where I mentioned I wanted to come to it before we ended, and you said serving the story. So I didn't realize it, and again, it's kind of funny. My personal journey was science. I was my strong suit, biology, chemistry, anatomy.
God bless you. The chemistry, I'm with you. Biology, anatomy. That's that chemistry stuff.
Yeah.
Forget it.
But growing up, English was my worst subject. It was my kryptonite. So I was a hesitant writer. It was my kryptonite. And then by writing my first book, and then I became a writer through several years of challenges. But each day I would set up a new challenge. I have to get the page numbering. But how do you start on my book? Because this was my self-help book for mental health, Recovery Revolution over there. Okay, I got to put the table of comments and put Roman numerals, and then how do you start on page 5, page number 1? Figuring out all these things, right. And then through this entire process of, I created this book, and yes, it's an accomplishment. It's something to celebrate. And I realized, looking back, with my short films I was making in high school, it was short stories, and then I realized short stories are some of the most difficult things to write because, as one of my friends told me, every word, every second of that short film matters. If it's a short story, every panel, every word, you have to cut it down. So, and that really is the adage, every panel, every word is moving the story forward.
Right.
Unlike life, where, right before I got my water, maybe I wouldn't include that in the story because it doesn't move the story forward. Yeah, I'm drinking it during this interview, but it's real life, but it's not story. So
right.
When I was getting ready to kickstart Bootstrapped, I found out, so I'm in South Florida, and they had this Florida SuperCon. Not a big fan. It's more of a, anime cosplay, but it's in Miami, and I wanted to give out some of these. So I wanted to give out a little ash can and to promote it. So, but the problem was I had 2 weeks, and my artist is amazing, but even he can't get me finished, lettered, colored 8 pages in 2 weeks. So I challenged myself, and I think that a challenge and restrictions or a short story is the best way as a creative writing exercise.
Yeah.
It's mental gymnastics. So what I did is I had my Seinfeld parody is called Defrosted, and which I have on Amazon, print on demand. But there's a backup story. It's an 8-page backup story called Serenity Aura, parody of Serenity Now from Frankenstein's character. But I had this backup story. So on my way to a family trip, I was going to be at the airport for a few hours. I printed out the 8 pages unlettered finished artwork, and I started just penciling in. And I printed 4 on a page, and I cut them out, and I reshuffled the pages, and I created a new story to highlight Defrosted, bootstrapped. And then I was having so much fun with it. I printed out a few more before I left. I now have 6 different stories of the same artwork in different orders.
Wow.
And so what I'm going to do is after bootstrapped, I'm going to put it together. I'll probably call it the, Serenity or a multiverse, but just something. And then I want to challenge some creators and someone who's writers out there. And I'm going to put this on the Comics Magic Substack. I'm going to say creating challenge. Here, take these pages, shuffle them in any way, and write your own story, and just have fun with it. But it sounds exactly like what you did on of course, your students are at a much different theological level, but it's that same idea of a constraint, 12 pages, and you can do it. So, I don't know, any thoughts there, but I sure as heck had fun. I couldn't imagine I did it once, and once I realized I could do it once, then there was no stopping me, and I had another idea, and now I have 6 different short stories, 8 pages long.
It's that having an attainable first experience, and one of the things I run into a lot is where I have creators that, they want to tell me their, the 12 graphic novel series that they have in mind, like 100-page graphic novels times 12.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, first of all, that's a ridiculous amount of money. So let's back off. And what I would, in their case, I'm like, if you have something that's that big, I want you to write a 25-page story. Yeah. Same principle that what I said with the 12, but 25 pages. This is a one-shot that introduces your character, and I want you to, show us who they are, and do it in a compelling way. And I want you to think about this as the opening salvo. This is introducing that character and then setting up for future stories. But it has to be compelling, in a sense that, people would want to read more stories. They like this person enough that you've introduced to them. They see the potential in them that they would want to know more about them. They want to get to know them. And it goes back to that principle I said about you can't love what you don't know. You have, even whether it's a 12-page story or a 25-page story, I really think it's about the characters. It's compelling characters that resonate with you. Those are the stories that are going to have staying power.
Yeah. And it just goes to the point and really understanding stories we care about them, and I'm a big advocate. I love Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey.
Sure.
And one thing I didn't realize, early about movies was the character has to grow and change through the obstacles placed before him or her. And without that growth, there can be a story, but at least I'm going to say, kind of like we talked about earlier, it's not going to resonate with as many people unless the character grows. So I think it's...
Well, you have a tremendous advantage over most writers is because of your psychology background, is your understanding, the more you understand about the human person and our motivations. If you think about it, it's the people that are open to growing that are the most intriguing people. It's the people that are stuck in a rut that they tend to become a parody of themselves, because they're afraid to, but they can be interesting stories too, because given the right impetus, even somebody who tends to be stuck in a rut can be forced out of that. That's why I was saying that one story I was telling you about with the introvert, the Traveler's Guide to Phlegoria. Why it's such a cool story is because you do have like in the initial pages, you literally see him. He's the photographer for the local paper, okay? And the writer who he's supposed to accompany they got sick, so his editor sends him out to do the story. And we literally see a scene where he's in the toilet stall, sitting on the toilet, not going to the bathroom or anything, but sitting on the toilet, going through all this in his head, psyching himself up so that he can go to the car and then drive to talk to this guy. Which he's totally he's unequipped to do it, but he ends up rising to the occasion, making himself do it, talks to the guy, and that opens up eventually the portal opens and takes him to the other world. But it's those characters sometimes that would be the least likely to change and evolve, and watching them kind of change and evolve that can be the most satisfying.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean,
Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, somebody who's set in his ways. He's like a caricature. I mean, we even refer to him, people, as a Scrooge type character because they're a caricature. But what I love, I'll be honest with you, that story is my favorite piece of literature of all time. Awesome. And it's because of the redemption story. Yeah. It's because of the change, the tremendous change. Yeah. And what I love about it too is we get the backstory of why he is the way he is. And it is tragic. He becomes this, instead of somebody that you dislike and hate, you start to feel sorry for. Because had things gone a different way, had he had a loving mother, for example, he didn't have that. His mother died, in the childbirth of his sister. Had he had that, his father was not kind. What if his father was kind? What if his father was supportive? He has a glimpse of that in Mr. Fezziwig, who he apprentices under him. Mm-hmm. But had that have been in his life from the beginning, it might have changed his entire trajectory.
I love it. So in closing, just final items here. We'll end with maybe two more things. So one thing would be 3 tips for a new comic creator. We'll say a writer or artist. You already gave us one. We'll just call it, do 8 to 22 pages of one comic, right? A short story. That's number one. What would be your top, as an editor, tips or tricks for a first timer that you see that would be your
like I said,
or recommendation that you saw over and over?
There's going to be, this is something really important, is there's going to be a lot of people that are willing to take your money. Oh. I really think it's important to associate yourself with an experienced editor, somebody who has a track record of getting projects through, getting them done. Because what they will do is help you hire a team that will do their job and finish the job. Yeah. And that's really important. And especially if you have a publisher who's helped to get their people into publishing houses, I think that's really important. Like I just helped an independent person get a contract with Antarctic. I mean, it's a smaller press, but when you're beginning, that's where you begin. Right. Marvel and DC are not hiring you right out of the blocks unless you know God or something.
Ironically, my editor, Charles Santino, shared with me recently that he's paying his artist more than the big 2 houses right in today's day and age, 2025. So, well, thank you for that. I'm going to end with, I notice you tend to have a lot of Hellboy memorabilia. Share with me if you're a fan, and if so, why of that work in particular?
Well, I'm a really big Mike Mignola fan, and the reason for that is I feel like of all the creators today, Mike Mignola has accomplished something that nobody else has. He has created an entire universe of characters. I mean, like his Mignolaverse, I think sometimes people refer to it, could be competitive with Marvel or DC. Wow. In terms of size. It's not as big as those, but it's I don't think there's anything else. It would be the number 3 universe in my opinion.
Wow.
Okay. It has lots. It's not just Hellboy, not just BPRD, not just Abe Sapien or Baltimore or Witchfinder, or the list goes on and on and on and on. I'm a big Lobster Johnson fan. He's up on that shelf, by the way, right there.
That one.
But so the magnitude of what he created is certainly a big plus. He's an artist, very distinctive style, but he's a very good writer, and it's very rare to get a writer or an artist who can write.
Yeah.
And he can, and that's really cool. And I also, probably the third thing I love is, and this is going back in our conversation, he relies a lot on folklore, and I love that. Because there are some amazing stories, whether it be mythological gods and goddesses or horror, monsters, these idea of these monsters that exist, and then incorporating them into more modern stories, bringing them, kind of like breathing new life into those stories. I just think that's amazing, and then the characters that he creates are very compelling, and I there's just a lot to love about Hellboy. If I could ever have a dream come true, I'd love to have the Shepherd team up with Hellboy. I think it'd be amazing.
Right. It's not unheard of. It's not unheard of. Well, Andrea, thank you so much. I had such a great experience. Again, as you said, I kind of threw some things at you real quick, and you said each one of those we could go in. So I thank you so much. More to come. But where could our audience, if someone wanted to reach out, do you have availability, or where could someone start to learn more about you or your work? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you can find my website is The Shepherd Comic, and you can find my work with the series The Shepherd, but also my editing. Some examples of my editing are up there. I'm easily found, The Shepherd Comic, on Instagram and Facebook. I'm easily found in both those sites, and I'm always open to helping people in terms of as an editor.
Yeah, no, I have seen that firsthand. Not only just you interacting with me from some just random comic convention goer, but also when I was at your stand multiple times, both you individually or when you were with a scout, and you always listen to everyone and anyone, and again, just I can just tell, I do see that teacher background, because when I know people that are teachers, they just have a way of interacting that is deeper than the average individual, and I really get that from you. So thank you.
Thanks.
And I guess the last thing, it could be the greatest comic book out there, but if no one knows about it, no one can read it.
Yeah.
And we know that in today's digital world, it relies on the individual to have their following, and I would imagine when you were with Scout, you might have said maybe 5 or 10 years ago, do you have an email list? Do you have followers?
Yeah.
What's your platform? So how do you, and especially with your work, Shepherd, how do you find the most effective ways to communicate your works?
Well, I'm going to tell you that is a weak spot. I'm being real honest. It's kind of a work in progress. That's the truth of it. I'm not natural for social media, because I like this kind of personal one-on-one interaction. I like talking to groups, as a teacher, that type of thing. But to me, social media feels like so much look at me. It's a lot of posturing. It's a lot of holding this. It's like, look at this. This is a brick. It's not a brick. But look at this. It looks like a brick. It must be a brick. And I want to be more authentic. I want to just try to be myself. And if that's not good enough, then, I don't know what to do about that. But I try to post on those sites. I probably don't do it the right way. So I don't want to hold myself up as this model, because I'm not. I'm one of those people, ideally, if I could have somebody else do my social media, I'd prefer that. Yeah. That's being really honest. But I'm working on building an email list. I should have started a lot earlier. I didn't, I do a lot of conventions. I like conventions because even if I don't sell the book, I'm pitching the book to a lot of people, and it feels like the right place to be, because comic book fans, the most intense comic book fans, will be at the comic conventions, so that's where I go. And I enjoy that. I enjoy talking with them and meeting people that way. but I also, I'm on Kickstarter as well. I've done a series of Kickstarters just like you, and that's a good way to find a tribe of people that like what you're doing, you know. And I found some of my biggest fans that way, where I've actually like one young lady, her name is Marissa. She lives up in Indianapolis. When I go to the convention up there, like we went out to dinner afterwards, and it was so wonderful. She's such a sweetheart, and she's such a big fan. It's almost embarrassing, because she sent me a picture where she had all of the covers, and she was like, "What am I missing?" And I was like, "Well, there's probably 3 or 4, but it's not many, So I ended up sending her the ones that she was missing, But it's just really cool. It's that interaction, to me, that's the personal interaction that I really like about it, and social media can be good in the sense that it can open up opportunities to meet people and interact with them. Sometimes it's sad to me that you don't get quite that. It doesn't achieve what it probably should. It should be a great place for communication, and unfortunately, I think sometimes it's a great place for name calling, and like I stayed off Twitter X because it felt like junior high.
Yeah.
I was like, I hated junior high. I don't want to go back to that. Are you kidding? Every time I turn around, this person is being shamed by somebody else. I'm like, been there, done that, not doing it again. So I don't know. That's probably not the answer you wanted. I'm not this paragon of social media excellence.
It is the answer. It's your answer. It's truth. And again, it's probably one of the hardest things for me too, because I struggle with it. Although I've listened and to many podcasts on social media outreach and marketing. In my job, I do a little bit of that. I've read books on it, and I still struggle. You still struggle, and yet we all realize it's part of this, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses.